Greetings, friends. Welcome back to From the Tomes. It's been a little while. As far as the new interface I'm using, I'm not necessarily seeing people as they come into the chat or come into the viewer dialogue, unlike the other interface I was using. So make sure you say hi in chat. I think everything's all set up. Peach is here. What are we talking about tonight? Good question, Peach. I think we're just going to have a little catch up. Looks like everything's actually working on my end. It's amazing what a new interface does, right? Well, I guess I'll just start at the beginning. So it's been a while. It's been since May the 4th, in fact. That was the last chat we did here. And that was never my intention, but that's what happens. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So that's where I'm gonna start. As everyone knows, and I think I've actually got my mic that I was having trouble with last time. I don't know if I'm using. Let's see, mic auxiliary. I'm not gonna change it now that it's working. What do I got going on? I'm just using the MacBook Pro microphone. That's fine. I'll use that for tonight, and I'll worry about setting up my broadcast mic next time. But yeah. So uh, and again, I don't have the one thing I don't have on OBS is a counter to see who's coming into the chat and who's not. So say hi if you're here, if you want. If you don't want to say hi, that's okay. That's part of the fun of this, right? Is chatting. But yeah, so the last time I did this, so I had massive sound issues, and I tried a couple different mic settings, and that didn't work. And in between, I ran several tests. Yes, you're saying hi again. I thought it was someone else. I was like, someone else saying hi? It's PJ again. Um, I ran several mic tests and nothing I could get on Twitch Studio. Beta for Mac. I mean, I guess that should have been my first hint, all right? Beta for Mac. Like, I shouldn't have expected much. But it absolutely was pretty abysmal. And I kept getting cutting out. I kept dropping the audio signal. I tried it again last week or earlier this week, and Wendell Burke, Tom, and Tom outside of the virtual realm, Wendell couldn't even hear me. He was like, "No, I can't hear anything." I was like, "Great." So I did a little bit of research, and I plugged in OBS Studio this past week, and it's been working really well. It's a very robust interface, and it's really complicated, like in a good way. Like there's a lot that I can do with it in terms of setting up a virtual studio and having multi-screen and stuff like that. So I've got to really, really work on that. But in between, several things happened. Let's use that. There's the Croc. There's Justin. In between, several things happened. Not the least of which the end of my semester rolled in, and there was just simply no way I was going to be doing anything else but cleaning up the end of the semester, especially with the sabbatical starting. Let me adjust some windows here. Yeah, I mean, there you can do a lot with OBS, and I'm really impressed. And I have to spend some time. I have to dig into it. Um, so the end of the semester rolled in, and I just couldn't research a new studio. I couldn't learn how to use the interface because it took me a few days of finding out where everything was in this. And I'm pretty computer literate, but there's a lot of stuff here, so it took me a little bit of time to dig in. I did dress today too because I figured we'd have some be a little more formal for the chat. Plus, who knows? We might talk about the Call of Cthulhu, the wrap up of the Call of Cthulhu game tonight. It did finally wrap up, so that's one of the things we're going to talk about, PJ. So yeah, so we had the end of the semester, And then it was just like a series of little things. And every week I was like, oh, I'm going to get the chat started again this week. And then it was just like little thing after little thing that just kept hitting me. But as I say on my blog now, as you know, for anyone who's watching this for the first time, obviously, which won't be anybody who's in the chat room because we're all, I think everyone that's here now are regulars. And real life. Well, PJ not so much real life these days, but due to distance. But real life regulars. The From the Tomes is both my streaming channel in terms of Twitch. That's the name of the Twitch. Not for a long while. Yeah, we haven't hung out regularly in a long while, unfortunately. But like I said, we'll endeavor to change that this year. Now that things are a little bit less insane in the world. Well, a little bit less insane as far as COVID in the world. At least in terms of restrictions and travel. But we've got From the Tomes, which is this. Then I also have the YouTube component to this, which sometimes are just these videos exported to YouTube. But I'm going to get back to the full production videos because that's really where people, I think, were really interested in hearing me talk about process. But what I'm going to really talk about tonight is, now that we've gotten through that introductory, like where have I been, why haven't I been doing this, and life is the short answer. Work, life, all those things. Now that I'm off for the year to work on game design stuff, I will be focusing back on getting into this world a little bit more regularly, and I'll probably be doing some other nights too, because I've had a number of people say, "Oh, you always stream at the same time usually on Wednesday nights," which is good, and I do that because I know I have the space to myself. I can manage it all. And not that I can't do that at other nights or other times, but it's just a lot easier because it's like the one few hours I have during the week that I know I kind of have the house to myself, and I can, aside from the occasional cat bomb or dog bomb, I can manage it. And they're all being rather quiet. They're all being rather subdued right now. But I will be doing some additional chats. I'll be doing some additional full-length videos. And like I said, we've got a couple of like friends who, have been following what I do for a while, who just can't physically make this time slot, and that's all right. Like I said, it was largely an experiment the past few months, just to get it rolling. So the other thing I'm going to really talk about is where everything's at as far as the game design stuff. Let's see, as well as not the date email for the big parties. I don't think I did, PJ. I don't think I did get that save the date email. I know we talked about it, and you said I will be sending you something that is regarding a party. So if you can resend it, I'll just put my email here just to make sure. If you could resend it, that would be wonderful, because I don't think I did get it. I see the flaw, so the chat scrolls down. So the bottom of the chat gets cut off. All right, so that's the flaw. youandyourfullname.com. I did not see it. Which doesn't mean you didn't send it. It simply means that I did not see it. So, I guess we'll do this. So, if you can resend it, I'll check after I'm done here, but if you get a chance to resend it, I will take a look. There's a good chance if it didn't come from a name it recognized, it ended up in a spam folder. I didn't see it. But send it again now that I know that I'm looking for it. I will definitely let you know, because it'd be great to see you and some of the other folks that we haven't seen in a while. So yeah. So where have I been? What I've been up to? Well, the big thing. Okay, I'll take a look after I'm done here. Thanks. So yeah, what I've been really working on has been getting an element of these rules all together. And I've talked a little bit about battle style gifts. Let me pull up the other document here. Because of course I pulled the wrong one up and shared it, because that's what happens. There's my main rules. Gifts compiled. That's what I was looking for. So let me just switch this window over to gifts compiled. There we are. The OBS is really fluid. So this is a part of the game that I I have had in from the very beginning, and those who have play tested it. Well, I think Justin's the only one who played. I think Justin. I don't remember actually. Justin might not have been here. I think we were missing Justin and Diana for that. I can't remember if Justin play tested this or not. But I think that I mean, people play tested it online and they play tested it in the regular group, but I don't think Justin was here that day actually. But anyway, it's part of the game that as some people saw my post earlier this week. Game design is a cascade effect. It's you change one rule in one place and there's a cascade of tears over your hundreds of pages of documents because you realize you're going to have to fundamentally change so many different things in the rules. So, I consider this game fairly solid in terms of the core mechanical elements. And that came together amazingly quickly. And of course there were tweaks, but the one thing that has been kind of this sticking point, as almost always is, this could be the topic for tonight, or we could have a whole other topic on this, is just how difficult having any kind of magical system in any of these games works. I know we touched on this when we were talking about generic versus system-specific games. We brought up games like Ars Magica and Mage, the Ascension, where the magic is the core of the game. So that's a little different. That's kind of backwards engineering some of these games. Whereas magic is often we add it in on top of everything else, and then it totally screws everything else up, which is kind of where I was at in terms of this game. Magic got much more complicated and much larger and a much bigger part of the game than I ever anticipated, despite it being called sword and sorcery genre game. So the sorcery became quite dominant, and largely because I wanted to keep it very, very fluid. I wanted Magic to be powerful and fluid, but have a risk. But even those character risks, especially in a playtest scenario, never once deterred anybody from doing the biggest, most powerful, most game-altering thing they could possibly do. And I guess that's player nature, because of course, as a player, I'd probably do the same exact thing. So, it became like this arms race with Magic, where Magic just was dominating everything. And how do we stop Magic from dominating everything? So, we went back and forth, and I have changed Magic since then. I've made it riskier to use Magic. I've made it harder to use the high-powered Magic effects that are really like environmentally altering. But I also went in and balanced out some of the other aspects of character creation. And the first step was, and I mentioned this in the blog post, I do have the website, harrowedland.com. And that's another announcement I'll make later about the websites. I'll at least mention it. It won't be a big announcement. But I talk about how the discussion was to take the non-magic elements and balance it out, so non-magic using characters could be just as powerful. And in the beginning, since the very beginning of the game, I had something in called gifts, and those of you who've looked at the game have seen it. And it's kind of that, like in Vampire, it would be merits. GURPS, I don't know, they called it advantages. That's where White Wolf stole it from, was the GURPS advantages. The system was almost identical at points. Every game since then has really had this. I forget what they call it in Savage Worlds, but there's a similar system. Those little bonuses that your characters get that make them heroic, that make them just not the farmer or the shopkeeper. Or as we said in the chat a month ago, the butter maker. Yeah, I'm Joe. I make butter. This is my son. He makes butter. What makes your character not that guy who makes butter? So I sat down and I made the I'm seeing more chat here. Let's see. There's more chat that I'm not seeing. Yeah, rewrites and editing are the absolute worst. Magic into Shadowrun. I saw a really nice crossover of Cyberpunk and World of Darkness at one point. and it actually worked really well. I think it was in Dragon magazine, and it was shockingly good. I mean, it was like, and I don't know how well it would have been playable long term, but it incorporated the supernatural and the cyberpunk elements really well. I don't remember if they dealt with magic at all, but so the magic was awful. So my first thought was, let's make the sword equal to the sorcery. So I started on battle style gifts, which is the first document. Now gifts they've never been magical. Initially they were very much things like this, like ambidextrous and beastmaster, the thing being that you could control animals, but like in a very organic way, not as much in the completely magical way. Direction finder, having a direction sense, sharpened senses, swiftness. These little things that gave your character this boost, this advantage, without making it a magical ability. Well, clearly once I started with the battle style gifts, which I talked about last time, some of it became almost to the point of magic. It was some of it was so powerful that it effectively became magical. And we did talk a little bit about these in the last chat, I think. So, abilities like Skull Splitter and the Serpent's Coil and these kinds of things that give this narrative context, as well as just giving the characters these extra combat abilities. So I started messing with those, and they quickly became very powerful. But in a good way. I mean, the game is high powered. I've never even denied that it was high powered. It's sword and sorcery. It's meant to be overborn. It's meant to be kind of heavy metal and crazy, and it's not meant to be a game that is subtle, but it's also very character focused, and that's where some of these other gifts really come in that are very interesting. So then I started with this concept of, all right, well, if I'm making magic as powerful, and I'm making sword work and combat and all this that powerful with all these special abilities, well, then I have to have something that makes characters who don't fall into one of those two categories, though I assume most characters in this game will fall into one of those two categories, make them feel as important and feel as powerful. So I started working on what I called, at the time I called them personal paths, but I've decided to call them attribute paths, because that's what they are. Each one is cued to a particular character attribute, and that would be mind, that would be body, that would be presence, or that would be finesse. So what they are they're essentially augmentations to actions that you would undertake with those abilities or skills that are keyed to those abilities. So they're enhancements. But I didn't just want, you get an extra die or you get an extra point. Some of them do that at the basic tier. And like Tower of Will is all these things that you can do just by focusing your mind. I'm sorry, those are still battle style. Let me go back up to the personal path gifts. Oh, well, I have the battle style gifts open. Maybe that's why. Okay, so here we go. So we have our history lineage gifts. There we go. I was in the wrong document yet again. Silly me. So we have some gifts that augment magic, but then we have the attribute paths. And that's what I've really been working on. And we talked a little bit about these. These were the ones that I was joking around. I named as many of them after classic heavy metal songs as I possibly could, in addition to the combat gifts. So, excuse me, I did in fact start adding these things that are augmentations for characters that didn't want to necessarily just focus on battle styles or on magic. The first two dealt with everyone but body and finesse. So body and finesse are obviously your physical characteristics, your equivalents of strength and dexterity, or constitution and strength combined dexterity, right? And it ended up being fairly straightforward, fairly simple. Then the cascade effect began when I began adding the mental and the presence oriented, the mind and the presence oriented gifts. And that's when I saw that there were such huge holes in the system that I had not yet addressed, because I didn't have to address them, and mostly getting very specific, dealing with very specific things. Just for example, let's look at the voice of Lyra, which is kind of your charm, your beguiling people, your commanding crowds, that kind of stuff. If we were to use a VTM reference, it'd be your presence discipline. Effectively your character has a presence discipline. A little more subtle than that. It's not quite as potent as vampire presence, but it's still pretty potent. But I realized there was absolutely no system in place for social challenges. And this was this whole other can of worms that I'll probably address at length in a full-length video. But dealing with social challenges is and always has been an extremely difficult part of running these games, especially when the game has had absolutely no mechanism in place for it. Think of old school D&D or Rifts, social challenge. Come on, I'm going to talk to it, right? I'm just going to kill it, or whatever, or seduce it, right? One of those two things. It's like pretty much that was the mold of RPGs for so long. So it was a weird thing to sit back, and I consulted with quite a few people I know who are into games and into game design. I'm like, how do I go about to start really start coming up with a system for social challenges? There was a very loose opposed social score system there in the rules, but it was so loose it might as well have been have the players talk to each other and roll a die and see what happens. So I had to really stratify that. So that was like this whole other process of implementing a social challenge system, which I haven't tested yet. So again, once we get back into play testing, which hopefully will be in the next month or two, we'll see how it works. And so a lot of these presence gifts implement or adjust social challenge environments or bypass the social challenge environment. The mind gifts. There were quite a few mind gifts that I went and I had to go back and really rethink how things like your perception skill works, right? Really think about how seeing things and deducing things and figuring things out works. And that became this whole other system development process that I hadn't really undertaken yet, because up until that moment I hadn't really had to think too much about it. I've also been testing this with very experienced players and players who are used to me and players who know me as a game master. So a lot of what went on as far as the adjudication was very trust-based and very like how we know John's going to make these kinds of decisions, and it's going to be evident, it's going to be fair, because that's how he runs the games. But what happens when this goes out to a general playtest audience? A general playtest audience that you have to spell everything out. And I know from teaching game dev classes, in addition to playtesting games, the first thing that's going to happen, if not everything is spelled out for players, they are going to run amok with it, and they are going to pick and challenge every possible outcome in these situations. And that's good, because that's especially for playtesting, that's what you want. Even as far as just playing the game, you want people who are creative. You want people who are going to try to game it a little bit and see what they can do. You just have to be prepared for it. So I had to go through and write up these whole challenge systems. And that was this whole chunk of time that I did not anticipate needing to spend on it. And it's fine. It needed to be done. It needed to be done at some point. So just for an example, what I've got right here on the screen, and again, I'll be hopefully releasing some of these documents soon for general review and play tests and whatnot. I tried to incorporate everything into the narrative of the world, such as the Crystani Topki is the crystal mind, and it's based on, at least the name of it is based on the one culture, the Rubari, who they have a lot of ascetic mysticism in their culture. The mystic caste does have this form, this almost monk-like form of owning their mental powers to the point that they, can affect their bodies with it. Think breaking bricks with kung fu, or think being able to, so like some of the aesthetics who have been able to do things like stay submerged for 3 minutes without air because they've just trained their body to get to a point that their mind can overcome some of these or manipulate some of these physical limitations. These almost kind of mythical abilities that monks and aesthetics have, in addition to just some other things like mental defense against mind control, learning things quickly. And again, these were all systems that kind of weren't there. They were there very loosely. It was very off the cuff and, all right, how do we do it? And my goal was always to create a game with a heavy narrative element. But it became more and more apparent that as the game itself got more complex, just saying, well, it's up to the, so I'll circle back to that. It's up to the game master's discretion. As my responsibility as a game master, I should take the 20 minutes or hour or two out and at least come up with a basic idea and start throwing it out there to give examples of what I mean. And I ran into this. So we just started playing Vampire. Justin's here. I don't know if Lauren made it on. Lauren's running Vampire. First Vampire game I've played in a while. And I'm playing a Malkavian, everyone's favorite clan. And no, I don't run around in a giant bunny suit. I don't hit people with rubber chickens. Though the temptation was there, I decided not to do it. But I was looking at the dementation discipline, and it's a great concept, right? I mean, it feeds into like Renfield and this idea of a vampire almost being a possessing ghost, which in a lot of cultures, that's actually what vampires were. They were hungry ghosts, manipulative ghosts. It really plays into all that, but there is literally no system for some of those abilities. Like some of your key dementation abilities, it's almost, at one point they almost even say under level 2, well, it's up to the storyteller to come up with. I'm like, so that's great, because I trust the storyteller I have. If I'm running the game, they can trust me. But, just saying, there's no real effect. It's whatever the storyteller makes up. I was like, okay, this is exactly why I just spent the time doing all these system revisions that I absolutely had to do in this system work that I had to do, because I didn't want to be that, frankly, irresponsible. Now, this is also the V20 version. I have not looked at V5 yet, and I actually was talking to a couple people about it today. I don't have enough vested interest in running a whole new edition of Vampire to go play the game I've been playing for 30 years. And if I had a group that really wanted to play the 5th edition or that were playing it, then I would definitely pick it up. But I don't have any desire to go in and relearn Vampire. But would any of us have trusted Bill back in the day? No, of course not. Nobody trusted Bill. Bill was a great game facilitator, but in terms of getting the people there, but yeah, you just kind of had to ignore what he did as a game master and play your own game. I mean, especially after, and I don't know if you saw my thread where I talked about some of my experiences in the con scene. One of them with Bill, which we all had them with Bill. But, especially after it got to a certain point, Bill was just feeding his own ego and going crazy and abusing players, So, yeah. Oh, the Great Limelight tobacco. So it was the Limelight. See, I originally said it was the Limelight. Then I was double guessing myself as to whether it was the Limelight, if it was that event. And I thought it was. Again, it all becomes so hazy. Because there was another guy running games I was trying to remember his name too, and I talked to him quite a few times. And I went to one of his small games. I didn't go to one of his games in the limelight. Another guy, Matt Barker, I think his name was. And I don't know if he got into actual development or if he got into professionally running games, but he was doing them at the limelight around the same time. And his games were very small, but they were very tight. Yeah, yeah. Well, I was only at one of the limelight games, and I think it was a combination con and like I think there was a hotel and a con involved. Then there was the limelight. And then the whole limelight with all the money disappearing occurred. I don't know how much anyone knows, but the limelight at the time was owned by the Russian mafia, or at least infiltrated by the Russian mafia, and like all anybody could think about was somebody getting killed over this $5,000 that nobody could find. But anyway, right. I mean, yeah. It's a hell of a drug, exactly. Makes you do some really, as Rick James told us, makes you do some really crazy, dumbass things. I'm glad I never got into that end of the scene, but yeah. I don't know if you were in the room that a certain ex-Marine who used to play had brought his 45 as a prop. And this 45 was pulled during the game in a private hotel room, and it was loaded. And this ex-Marine had been taking drugs the entire night. And I'm sure if you think you know who I'm talking about, it is exactly who I'm talking about. And I just remember like the response when everybody realized that this guy who was stoned out of his mind had this loaded gun at a game. You know, it was just things that went on. That it was like going to nightclub, like, you know, clubs like the Limelight, or going to hardcore shows. Then like the shit that went on, you just can't. You tell people today and they don't believe you. I'm like, no, that's really what it was like. But anyway, yeah, back to so people like Bill is exactly. I just remember the Vampire LARP. Yeah, well, Necropolis was run in a very different way, and it was the party aspect was definitely there because you were there to have fun, but it was not, you know, let's have a drugs arm race in the, you know, this game that's in this dark criminal underground world. Let's try to play this in real life. Yeah. Yeah, it was funny. Necropolis games. I was telling somebody about that group the other day, and I was trying to remember what it was called, what you guys had called it, and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. I remember eventually he took one of Bill's games. I remember that. That was a debacle. That was hilarious. But yeah, so this is exactly the reason why I went through and made these rules for this game this explicit, because I remember in the gaming, the world around, the climate around gaming is horrible with these people call this. Yeah, I remember that. Now I remember that. Oh, that's all coming back now. That's really funny. You know, I heard that after Bill had his car accident, I ran into him once. He was like this totally different person. It was weird. And from what people had said, he had become like really chill. I mean, I guess a near-death experience and brain injury can do that to you. And again, I haven't actually talked to him or seen him in decades, but it was about 20 years ago. It was like shortly after everybody went on their own way, that I ran into him at a game store. And it was a very weird experience. He kind of remembered who I was. Like, he didn't really remember, like he knew me. But then someone else mentioned my name, and he's like, oh yeah, Harford, you know? Yeah. And again, like, I have not had any extended contact with him beyond that one chance encounter that one night. And it honestly, it took me a little bit to even realize who he was. And someone said his name, and I was like, oh my God, that's Bill Ransdale. And yeah, he was basically totally different person. And I knew he was like in college trying to get a degree and trying to like not be an awful human, you know? I was like, good. Yeah, I was like, cool, you know? So it's good. So I said that's good. But yeah, there was a period where he was just, it was very, very difficult to be around. Yeah. Yeah, right, right. I mean, again, we kind of like, even in these online environments, always managed to reconnect. In fact, I'd reconnected with Jen because you weren't even on social media at that point. Um, I know we'd emailed a few times, so. But yeah, so all those early experiences really informed me is what not to do when making a game or writing a game, because you have players who just, they will run amok with it. There will always be a problem. It will always be, so that's what I went back in, and I really went for these extremely, not like hyper detailed, not like Traveler detailed, but clear, what I would consider clear cut guidelines for using these things that I've implemented in this game. They're gonna have to be tested over the next several months. So I will definitely keep working on that. So the other hey, there's Lauren. How are you? We just briefly talked about our vampire game. I was saying, and I'll talk to you about it this week at some point, but part of what I've learned to do in writing my own rule set, which I was just chatting a little bit now. So PJ's on, Justin was on before, Lauren, who's one of our regular players, who's running Vampire now. She's Larbarian on Twitter. She does a bunch of cool craft stuff. There might be other people on in this new interface. I actually can't see who comes on and off, which is okay. If it's only people talk and chat that I can see that they are there. But I was talking about the rules sets I've been working on for Tales of the Harrowed Land, which I hope to play test with everybody again towards the end of the summer. But it was actually in reading some of the dementation stuff that I realized, like, there were no clear-cut rules how to deal with any of this. And that's when I went, and I'll talk to you about it this week, because I was like looking at the character again last night. I'm going like, it doesn't even tell me what this will actually do. Leave it up to the storyteller's discretion. And then Peach and I had a whole discussion about the guy we used to play Vampire with for years, who was just, at that time, who was an awful human being, and you could never trust him to make the right decision for the player, And it was just this reason to not make these kinds of decisions. But that's where the bulk of my time has been, as far as the game design the past month, is working up these battle style gifts, especially the social and the mental ones, because I was able to breeze through the physical in a couple days each, whereas the mental and the social gifts took so much more time. In fact, Lauren, some of this is based on your revision of that first character you played in the very first alpha play test of the system when you and Fran came over that night, where you played the very social character, like the courtesan, and you didn't really have what you felt were the same kinds of skills and abilities to manipulate a social environment, like some of the other characters had to manipulate other environments. And this just became re-emphasized. The more I play tested it, the more people who had magic, which has gotten much more complicated, can do really amazing things. Now people who are combat focused can do really crazy things. So I've had to implement a couple systems for social development and social environments. So we'll hopefully test all that out again at some point soon. Let's see, what else have I been up to? Yeah, tonight's chat, I'm just going to kind of ramble, catch up, and people can throw out ideas or talk. Well, the next thing, let's see my next big edition. This is the fun one. Let's share that. So here's our basic rule system. Yeah, you could definitely replay that character or make something totally different. The next play test, I will have people make up their own characters, and it's actually gonna be a social city environment. So I think it will definitely be something you can continue to play around with, or you can make something totally different. Like Neil said, for the next game, He wants to make a character kind of like Varys from Game of Thrones. That same sort of creepy social guy that's whispering in everybody's ear. Group cheers. This was fired. Let's see. PJ says something's quite similar in my groups here regards to 5e. And it's the 3 pillars. Yeah. So the combat pillar, social pillar, and exploration pillar. And there are only rules for combat. Exactly. And I've had that discussion. So again, and we've talked about various games of D&D in this, various versions of D&D in this chat many times. And one of my issues with 5e is that on one hand, it's one of the absolute cleanest for making complete characters, but then it's just very bare bones in terms of the actual role-playing structure. And I don't think you should ever have rules for role-playing, but having some tangible benefits for engaging socially or engaging in mental challenges, I think is really beneficial. And there are some games out there doing that. And I've gotten feedback from people. And some of someone, depending who's here or not here, has in fact met Neil, or they've heard me talk about him. But he is like encyclopedic as far as systems and new systems coming out. And he pointed me to a couple, and other people pointed me to a couple of games that have social factors. He says, GM, doesn't matter what behavior you want from your players. Well, yeah, it's true. Absolutely. If players are only rewarded by charging in and killing a monster, then they're only ever going to do that, right? Now, Warren can testify, and Justin can testify, that the joy of our group is they are so not loot-centric, and they're so not, like, progression-centric. Like, they're all about the play and the interaction with each other. Like, I literally can just be like, here's a goblin. And then, like, this whole story evolves around it, and the goblin may or may not even get killed in the process. So that's what's kind of cool, is that this group is so focused on the characters and the social interaction. I haven't even really had to do that. But the next thing I decided to come up with, because I had a gift called Heavyweight, which is your professional drinking gift, that was named after Neil's character, or was modeled after Neil's character, Apada, during our extended campaign play test over 2 years, where part of the character's goal was to just drink as much as possible in every situation, see what his character could do or not do. I made up Heavyweight for Neil, and then I came up with actual alcohol and intoxication rules for the game. So what would a sword and sorcery be without a alcohol and intoxication rule set? And I of course based some of this on my own extensive experiences in everything from brewing to being around a lot of drunks to being drunk to the historical knowledge I've gained about brewing and beer and mead from professional brewers I know and people who are into historical stuff. But what amazed me is how little I knew about historical winemaking. I really didn't know a lot about winemaking or about the social impact of wine in the ancient world, and how there was wine for different castes and wine or classes, and wine for different occasions, and how much you watered your wine was depending on who you were and what social occasion. It was really interesting. So we do have actual intoxication rules now, which is going to be probably a blast to have people play around with. Let's see. Several groups that the game is running is chock full of old nostalgia. And murdering everyone. That's pretty. Manhead's getting ripped off. That's hilarious. Yeah. Yeah, it's a weird thing. Like again, I play with 2 different groups. Right now we're doing Warhammer Fantasy Thursday or Friday nights. Mostly Thursdays, but we're going to have to do Friday this week. But anyway, just with people who are all, I've been playing D&D as long as, say, PJ and I have, and played all the different editions of all these games. So that's much more an old school kind of nostalgia game, but not really, because we've all evolved. We want different things. In the D&D game that I've run, yeah, we are pretty old, dude. We are pretty old. Considering my text chain today, I had a whole discussion about lower back pain. Well, I was like, gee, thanks, guys. Luckily, I'm amazingly not the worst off in terms of it as far as it goes. But the group that Lauren and Justin are in, the age ranges from when we first started playing late 20s, up to me, 52, 51, or however old I am. So there's this really wide breadth of experience and philosophy and what gaming is about. And that's really cool. And again, I talk to students who are now 18 to 20, and their idea of what role playing and gaming and D&D is so different. And again, I'm not one of those old guys who has a problem with it. I think it's great. They might want to play a different game than I would play, and that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly okay. So yeah, so the alcohol intoxication rules. I try to break it down in terms of both the strength of the alcohol and the quantity you drink. Depends on how many successes you need to not become intoxicated. Then if you become intoxicated, there are rules for that. So this was fun. This was quite amusing. This was a couple days of work, but it wasn't terrible. Again, it hasn't been play tested. I sent it out to the one playtest group to look at. They seemed to think it was A-okay. So we wrapped up our Call of Cthulhu game that both Lauren as Dr. Quinn, yes, Dr. Quinn, and Justin as the infamous Sturgill Kane, the Undertaker. They were actually two of the instrumental characters in thwarting the plans of the Mi-Go, at least for now. They took out the summoner, quote unquote, the summoner, which was the human that was altered by the Mi-Go and put back into the population. They managed to find her and mercy kill her because it was very clear she'd been abducted, X-Files, alien abduction style, and mysteriously reappears with the fake pregnancy. Well, not fake, but with a unusual pregnancy, though she could not have physically gotten pregnant. Yet rest in peace, Benny, says Justin. So Benny has stayed dead as far as anybody knows after he was burned. So they took out Mabel Beckthorn, the hapless school teacher who was abducted by the Mi-Go and turned into a human host for their creation called the Summoner, which they did not actually have to encounter the Summoner, and that's probably very good for them. There was the mind virus that was spreading that they actually don't know much about still as players, and that's intentional. But basically, the Summoner was going to be able to control and do things with people who had been infected with this alien virus. And it was weird because, of course, there are all these parallels to what's going on in the real world, and none of that was intentional in terms of viral spread or anything like that. They ended up having a confrontation and summoning the Man in the Hill, and we lost Atticus. I don't know if Andy's had a rough couple days in real life. I don't think he made it on tonight, but we lost Atticus, that Andy's rough and tumble mountain man type character, as he launched himself at the Man in the Hill, and Lauren's character loaded with homemade dynamite and proceeded to blow the situation up. Lauren's character, only because the players were so intent on trying to keep her alive, she has survived. The doctor has survived, but she will be grievously maimed and injured should she return to the game world. And Atticus went into the ritual space that the Man in the Hill had created, only to be absorbed into it and probably never seen again. So we had several maimed and mauled characters throughout the scenario. We had NPCs, horrible things happening to the NPCs, and in the end we had several very near scrapes with insanity and more than one temporary insanity event. And then we lost Atticus at the end. So Atticus was a favorite character for everybody, but that's Call of Cthulhu. The fact that only one of them when we got together the next weekend, and I don't even think Justin was here for that conversation, Lauren asked, so what was the point that you realized that we might actually solve this and it's not going to be devastating and catastrophic. And I said, well, when you made the decision to kill Mabel, the summoner, to take the summoner out, even though you didn't really know what you were doing in the context of the game and how it was going to affect the plot, that was the turning point at which you more or less thwarted the immediate plans, which was to activate the humans who had been infected with the virus and would start doing things at the behest of the Mi-Go en masse. So basically to turn the town into this almost kind of, Day of the Triffids scenario. If you know the old movie, you know the reference, but these aliens begin turning people into like plant people, basically. So, yeah, so there's no existential threat so great that it cannot be solved with the proper application of high explosives, says PJ. And that was the running joke through the whole game. Like, we all knew Atticus was going to go blow something up dramatically. Like, we all knew it. His character history, he had burned down a town already. Like, we just knew that this is how this was going to end. The question is, was he going to do it in the right situation? And that was where I kept going back, like, they could really screw this up and end up blowing up the wrong people, burning the town down. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Justin, Mabel, never saw Mabel. The woman just died in her sleep naturally. Yep, exactly. So that was indeed, it was a good solution. And it's interesting because I talked to the group frankly about the game, bluntly, and I enjoyed running it. I enjoyed the group. It definitely, I had put too many kind of extraneous things. Like there was the whole sequence about the serpent people, that the Chinese miners had uncovered this tomb of serpent people very early on. That was the first intro scenario to the game. That was part of the prelude. And yeah, perforated with wounds. And no, they killed her. They snowed her basically. They shot her up with opium because the doctor had all the access to all these drugs. They basically made it look like a natural death in her sleep after she'd returned from being abducted. She'd returned from being missing. So the serpent people ended up the serpent people thought was that the player characters were going to take these mummies or have these mummies relocated to the mining warehouse, and that they were going to probably do something with these serpent people mummies, which of course were still alive. And there was something else in the chamber they never found, and what else was in the chamber was the artifact that was buried with them. That when people played with the artifact, it was going to wake up the mummies. So assuming they were descendants of a dragon, when the Chinese miners found this artifact that had been in the area that had been blown open by the player characters who were trying to dynamite the chamber with the mummies closed, they woke up and took over Chinatown and disappeared with the entire population of Chinese miners that were in fact, they followed them out to this area, and then there was just like this vortex in the sand in the desert where it looked like all these people and oxes and carts and these trails, these almost dinosaur-like tracks leading up to it, and everything was gone. And they found one monk who had remained to become kind of the apostle of these serpent people, and was talking about the lush green jungles, and his fellows all going to this lush green jungle with the dragon. So that kind of freaked everybody out. But that part of this tale ended, and I decided I'd put in all these kind of threads early on, and there were just too many threads for the players to latch on to. Because the game master is crystal clear. Like, I see all the threads, I see how they all go together, and it's a lot harder for players to see. So in the end, I had to kind of start reducing them and really focusing on the abduction, the man in the hill, and whether or not they were actually going to try to penetrate the layer of the man in the hill and the other things. And they didn't get to that point. They didn't necessarily have to. Lucian, Lucian, the Dragonborn from D&D was the head of the serpent people. No, they were good old fashioned Hyperborean, Stygian worshipping serpent people, or worshipped by the Stygian serpent people. types, and so the reason why they were there is because if the player characters figured out how to wake them up, they would have known exactly what was going on with the Mi-Go, and they would have probably for a price or for some sort of favor or magical exchange have told the players a little bit earlier how to deal with it. Of course, you can't really trust the serpent people either. So it would have been that, like, okay, well, we have this one group of ancient horrors and this group of alien horrors. Is there any way that we're going to... Yeah, Croxagore, yeah. Yeah, they're more like Croxagore. Like, are we going to be able to trust either of these entities? And the answer is no. You probably would have been a little better off with the serpent people than the Mi-Go, but not necessarily. So, and it wasn't a right or a wrong. It was just the way the scenario was. And it was interesting seeing it unfold. And there was still no real resolution with this figure called Bartholomew Lonesome, the walking dude. He just kind of evaporated at some point. And they had a sighting of a coyote in the final battle that was acting strangely. So they don't know how that was related, but he was called a skinwalker by the Apache because they had seen him turn into a coyote, or they knew there was a skinwalker in the area. So that went unresolved, and that's okay because that is a much bigger plot, and the apparition of something like one of the masks. And in fact, they asked the man in the hill who this was, and all he would say is, "This one of the masks." And again, to most of the players, that actually didn't carry the weight that it might have to somebody who's really steeped in the game and the mythos, and that's okay because the characters wouldn't know either exactly who or what he was. But that's a much bigger plot. That was kind of this overarching. He's Benny Killer. Yeah, he was. He did kill Benny. He did kill Benny and bring him back to life in that horrible way. So, his goal was not unaligned with some of the other entities. He just has much more in terms of his own prerogatives and his own way of doing things. So, again, there were three things going on that overlapped in the mythos sense. The main focus was the disappearing townspeople, this virus, these constructs, more or less, created by the Mi-Go. And again, players who were really, really deep into the game might have started seeing that that some of what was reappearing or things that were happening looked to be Mi-Go creations. But it's perfectly fine as players that wasn't necessarily apparent, because that's the point. Your characters don't know. Your characters live in this town in the middle of nowhere, and these weird things start. I want it to be very X-Files in that way. That it was this weird kind of isolated series of events that seemed to form a bigger picture. So, in hindsight, I would have written it a little differently. I would have given more clues right up front, guided it. But it was also that everybody was really enjoying playing their character. So I didn't have any issue with people just spending time playing their characters around town, exploring the environment, trying weird stuff, even if it didn't work. I mean, that was part of this scenario. It wasn't meant to be a linear scenario like some of the stuff in the source books. The Haunting is the famous one, where it's the intro adventure, where it's basically a D&D adventure, format, where you go from room to room and you investigate things. But that's good because it helps teach people about the game. Or even Shadows of Yog-Sothoth and Monhagen Island and all those really early modules, they were very almost D&D module-like. This was meant to be more of a sandbox environment, but that's also challenging to both run and for players. And we're encountering it again right now with our Warhammer game. In our Warhammer game, we're kind of in the city, in Middenheim, in the middle of the carnival, but we're also trying to piece together these chaos cults. And we're running into the same thing that my Call of Cthulhu group did, that we have all these little threads, and we're just trying to figure out as players and as characters what's going on. So, I don't know. I think I'm up to speed. I'm up to speed with gaming, game dev, what we've been up to. We just started Lauren's vampire game, which is awesome. We're looking forward to next weekend, I think. Hopefully getting another session of it in. It's her first game running for us, first time running vampire, and it's really awesome so far. So, yeah. That's what I got for tonight. Got anything else? Any exciting stories they want to share? Any game stories? Non-gaming stories? Hopefully, like I said, we'll resume these chats a little more regularly. We'll start getting a bit more of a forum built up. Let's see. Yeah, yeah, so we'll scroll down here. Let's see if I can scroll this up a little bit for people. I'll also have to readjust this. I'm just glad I have a working chat interface. I'm so thrilled because if you remember one of my other sources of angst when I was working with the chat format of Twitch Studios, I couldn't get the visible chat interface to work. And so Justin says, I enjoyed the soundscape and time period of the old West, and with limitations in history and the progressive mythos and courage created from the players. Yeah, and like I've talked about in this broadcast before, it was challenging for me because, you know, if you're playing in Arkham or New York City or Chicago or Princeton or Berlin or Paris or London, even in the 1800s, there are these grand libraries. You can go find the Mythos tome that'll talk about the cult of Yog-Sothoth or whatever, you know, the Dagon cult. Even in the silly Rehoboth Beach scenario I ran, the beach party scenario I ran, you could go to the library and find out about this religious group called the Light of the Sea that was chased out by Puritans. You know, that they were equivalent. They were contemporaries of the Puritans who settled the area of Delaware, and the Puritans chased them out for their debaucherous dark magic practice. So boom, okay, you know that there's a Deep One cult in the area. Even if your characters don't know it, you can figure out there's a Cthulhu cult or a Deep One cult in the area. You can get names like Dagon and Cthulhu from resources in even the local little library. Of course, I made that available, but in the Old West, there wasn't any of that. You had to go talk to people. You had to go talk to people like Mel's friend. She met the cat lady, the crazy cat lady, who, let's see, I can't remember actually what I named her. What do I name her? You remember? I have it right here. Bernice Shue. She would go talk to Bernice Shue. And of course, then the joke became, are all these things leaving her alone because she's surrounded by cats from people who had read the Cats of Ulthar? And I was like, I don't know. I mean, she knew a lot. She knew a lot about weird stuff that was going on. I mean, if she couldn't articulate it in a way that necessarily translated for her characters. You just heard a thump. It's my dog scratching himself against the wall. Very goofy. As most of you know who've met him, he's very goofy. So yeah, you have to talk to Bernice Shue. You have to talk to the Apache, or find a way to talk to the Apache once your Apache character was taken out of the game. You know, you had to go talk to these people who'd been in this area for 50 years and had seen this history of strange stuff going on. Oh, I didn't even get to bring up shanking the preacher, shanking the young reverend. That was pretty crazy and bold too. Fran just shanking him right in the middle of the day, like, because they'd figured out that the young reverend was also a cultist. They had figured that out. I mean, I didn't really try to hide it. I made it pretty. He was the one link. I decided once they got him alone and talked to him, you know, it was clear this guy was not only worshiping Jesus. You know, it was clear this guy was in touch with something else, and his behavior was becoming more erratic. So the players decided the only sensible thing to take out young Reverend Rich McCleary was to just shank him behind the church, and that was just like, they did it in the middle of the day. I'm sitting there like, oh my god, they just did it. Like, I knew they were probably going to go after him at some point. Oh, sneak into his house at night, you know, whatever. No, they just got him alone behind the church, and Fran just knifed him. It was pretty hilarious. I was like, wow, and they actually got away with it, which was shocking. And that was the whole joke. That was, you know, as everybody's played it, and PJ can attest, like, there's no point that at some point your Call of Cthulhu character will not become a felon. You know, at some point you are becoming a felon, because trying to go to the cops and tell them you're seeing aliens and monsters normally doesn't work, even in a superstitious environment like the Old West. So they did what I thought they would do. They just often did it in a way that was much different than what I envisioned. But that's the joy of this. That's why running these games are so much fun. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, folks. I think I'm probably going to roll it up for tonight. think I hopefully got us back up to the point of where I left off over a month ago with this, of keeping everybody informed as to what I'm up to. Look for play tests. So the last bit of news, which is not news, is I spent a good chunk of today actually researching setting up the official Fox and Board Games website. And I've been avoiding it because I knew it was just going to be a really big job. But I've taken some time away. I've kind of gotten a couple other things going on. Now the sabbatical's going on. I hope to do this more regularly, and hope to have more updates rapidly and soon. And like I said, I'm looking at the Fox and Board website. It's not only going to be my games. I've got several very talented students who want to publish some game material through it, and I'm excited about that. One guy is so driven. He's a little older too. I think he's around late 20s, early 30s. Got out of the army. He's got a family. So he's a little more focused than some of my younger college students, who are still great. Some of them have some really good ideas. This guy's done all this crazy research. Okay. Yes. So I should actually, I know what Jen does, but I guess I didn't know she did exactly that. So yes, I should hit her up. And I would not even necessarily be object to possibly commissioning her to do some web content development and maintenance, depending how things go if we ramp this up. And not that I can't do it, because I did web dev professionally when I got out of college. So, but it's such a different game now, and it takes so much time. I will definitely be dropping her a note, probably within the next 24 hours, just to get her feedback on some stuff. And yeah. Okay. Not be her first game dev client. I know she does her own store and line of stuff. So, but I guess I didn't realize that's actually what she does. Cool. All right. Oh, cool. She does in Nordy City. All right. I've looked a little bit at Sean's stuff, and I've been a little bit more in touch with him now. Now, since you kind of put us back in touch, and was like, oh yeah, it's those guys. Like, each other. And when it registered who Sean, like I kind of knew I knew him, but then when you refreshed my memories to exactly who he was, I was like, oh yeah, all right, I remember that guy. And I've looked at some of his gaming stuff, so I know he looked at a little bit of mine, but we haven't actually really gotten to talk about yet. I think he's interested in playtesting Tales too, with a group, so that'd be cool. All right, guys, I'm gonna run. PJ, I'm gonna check out your email, and I'll see about the dates. I know there's a couple dates we're gonna be away in August, but all right, thanks for stopping in, guys. It was fun. Have a good one.